Hey, this is Brian Toller of Toller Capital Partners. I am pleased to be working with the Georgia Urban Ag Council, and we wanted to provide you with an update on the upcoming elections that are just now a few weeks away. The election for president gets a lot of our attention and gets a lot of polling information. What's important to remember is that here in Georgia, that race is very tight. So when you look at the presidential election, it's really not a whole lot different from the two Senate elections that we have. Now, it is unusual that we have two Senate elections on the ballot at the same time. Of course, we have the re-election campaign for Senator David Perdue, and that race remains very tight as he has a challenger, John Ossoff. But then we also have the second race, which currently is being filled by Senator Kelly Loeffler, as she has been appointed to replace Senator Johnny Isakson that had to step down earlier. You're also going to vote in what's called a jungle general election. And that means there's not just one clear Republican and one clear Democrat or one clear independent or libertarian on there. This election is going to have 21 candidates. It's going to be comprised of both Republicans, Democrats, independents, libertarians, Green Party, write-in candidates. There's 21. And so it's important to know that when you see the ballot that you don't freak out, because it is very unusual. With all these candidates, there's not going to be a clear winner. And a clear winner being one candidate has to get 50% or more. So it's highly unlikely that any one candidate is going to get that level of support. So really what you're trying to do, if you're a candidate in that race, you're trying to get into the top two. Well, recent polling from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution shows that there's really three top candidates that are running in that. First off, you have Senator Loeffler, who this is her re-election campaign, right? Because she's the current incumbent. But then you also have, right on her tail, is Doug Collins, who has served in Congress for a number of years, and someone that a lot of people in Georgia have come to know because of his service in Congress. And then also you have someone that's pretty well known on the Democrat side, and that is Raphael Warnock. He gets a lot of publicity because of his service at Martin Luther King Jr.'s church, Ebenezer Baptist Church. And so those are really your three top contenders, and they poll the highest here lately. But there's also all these other candidates and a couple of other Democrat candidates, Matt Lieberman in particular. It's going to really come down to who can turn out their base and who can get in this top two categories, and then there'll be a runoff. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's several U.S. House seats that are up for grabs, and this is a strange period for the state. We've had a pretty solid group of representatives in the U.S. House for us for several years. Very little change in that, but we're going to see a very different situation going into next year. Matter of fact, we've already seen that. Congressman Tom Graves announced that he was not going to run again, and his seat has already been filled because the Democrat that was running against Marjorie Taylor Greene, that was going to be on the November ballot, well, he had to drop out. And so since that's the case, so Marjorie Taylor Greene has already basically won her seat, and she'll be sworn in Congress next year. So that's a new phase. And of course, we all also know that the loss of Congressman John Lewis earlier this year, he lost his bout with cancer. Well, he's been replaced by former Georgia State Senator Nikema Williams. Now, her race isn't complete, but knowing that district, she'll win that hands down. So we know that she will also be sworn in next year. But a couple of other races that are still very much up in the air. And those include District 6, which is the one that's currently held by Lucy McBath. She's finishing up her first term, and she's running against the former Congresswoman of that same district, Karen Handel. And it is very close race for them right now. So that one could go either way. And then the other one is Congressional District 7. And that was a seat that was held by Congressman Rob Woodall for a decade. And he's decided not to run again. He won a very close election just 2 years ago. And so that is an open seat. And so the candidates there are Carolyn Bordeaux. She's the Democrat that's in that race. And then you have Rich McCormick. He's a newcomer to politics, and so that is expected to be a close race. So we know that those will change, but all the other seats, there's 14 total, all of the other seats all have opposition. Not expected to be as close a race as either of these two, but just know that there could be a lot of change there. So now let's focus on the state capitol. We know there's already going to be a lot of change in both in the House and the Senate in terms of new faces. We've talked about that in some of our Capitol Connection reports that we've issued throughout the year. But really what's at stake is what happens to control of the Georgia House. And by control of the Georgia House, I mean, is it going to be Republican-led as it is now, or can it be taken over by the Democrats? Well, the differential between the two is really very small. There are 180 seats that are in the Georgia House. Currently, 105 of those are held by Republicans and 75 are held by Democrats. So you have a 30-seat differential. If the Democrats can flip 16 seats in this upcoming election, then that will put them in the majority and they will control the House. That means they'll get to select their speaker, they'll get to do the committee appointments, they'll get to do committee chairman assignments in the House. And so it would be a sea change from what we've seen over the last really 2 decades. But really what's at stake in this thing is the redistricting process. Every 10 years, each state has to redraw its congressional district lines as well as the state House and state Senate district lines. You have to account for the population changes and how those have shifted, and that's really what the census we've all been hearing about, right? Fill out your census so we can make sure we get an accurate count. That census data plays into this. And so 2021 will be the year that some party is going to lead that redistricting process. Whoever controls the House controls the redistricting process. And when you control the redistricting process, then you can shape those districts to help your party to the best of your advantage. And it's happened when Democrats were in control, and it's happened with Republicans in control. So it's really no different for either one. It's just a reality. So now let's talk about voting. So the good news is if you haven't already registered to vote, maybe you're new to the state, and especially if you have some employees that are new to the state, well, they can still register to vote by the deadline of October the 5th. Registration is really very easy, and you can do it on the Secretary of State's website. And you can also use that website to request an absentee ballot. The AJC poll shows that about 34% of Georgia voters plan to show up on Election Day. So that means there's going to be a lot of early voting there locally or absentee ballot voting, right? So when you break that out into Republicans and Democrats, their data shows that about 50% of Republican voters plan to show up on Election Day. Now that's compared to about 18% of Democrats that say that they plan on voting on Election Day. 44% of Democrats say they plan to do absentee balloting. And then another large percentage are going to do, probably like I'm going to do, and just go to the polls early during that 3-week process of advanced voting and early voting. So we get 3 weeks. We'll talk about those dates in a minute. But it's important to know that the absentee balloting process continues to be popular, just like it was back in June with the primary election. There's already been well over 1 million ballots have been requested for absentee voting. But the voting actually begins, the early voting begins on October the 12th. Generally, there's one location per county where you can do that. And for me, it's at my courthouse, and I think that's where most of them are, but yours may not be. You can find out where that is on the Secretary of State's website. But it begins October the 12th, and then it goes to a 1-week period. And then you go to the advance voting. And so that's where there's multiple locations in each county where you can go and vote. And that's a 2-week period. So that'll take place October the 19th through October the 30th. Those hours of operation are 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. That's required by the state. 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. during that period of voting October the 19th through the 30th. at any of those locations in your county that are listed, will be listed on the Secretary of State's website. And then, of course, you get to Election Day. Election Day, same drill as always, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Now, something to remember, just when you thought the election season was over on November 3rd, you're wrong. We will undoubtedly have runoff elections. We could even have a runoff election in the Senator Perdue and John Ossoff race because there is a Libertarian candidate. And remember, one candidate has to get 50% or more of the vote. If they don't, then the two top vote getters would then be in a runoff. That's true for every election except the presidential election. There is no runoff in the presidential election. Whoever the majority vote getter is on that gets the Electoral College votes, and so that one's done. But when you look at the potential for some of these races, whether it's the Perdue-Ossoff Senate race or the Kelly Loeffler, Doug Collins, Raphael Warnock, that race, any of those top two contenders in that race would also be in a runoff. And so there's actually a couple of different parameters for that. Since that is a federal election, the runoff for those will be held on January the 5th of next year. If it is a local race, such as a state Senate race or a state House race that ends up going to a runoff because they have a Libertarian candidate, then those runoff races will be held on December the 1st. So we've got a long way to go. Certainly November 3rd is the big date, but we've got to look at all the potential for what comes after that so that we can make sure that we get the elections completed. We make sure that we have the voter turnout that we expect and that is deserved of this right, and also that we pay attention to the process as it moves along and don't think that, well, after November 3rd it's all over, because for the state of Georgia, it won't be over. Reach out to the Georgia Urban Ag Council. We're happy to help you any way we can. And remember, let's get out there and vote, y'all. Thanks so much.